Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2, and today I wanted to show you guys an absolutely busted Necromancer build. Pretty much everybody is playing Necromancer with minions, so I figured I would set it up and show you guys what I have been personally having a lot of success with. There's actually a ton of different ways that you can set up Minion Necromancer, and I'm going to be making different versions of the build, such as a boss damage oriented version, which will probably come out pretty soon. But this version of the build, I think, is generally suited for the majority of you guys out there. If you're just trying to get to level 100 and then do some higher end grinding at level 100, like some tier 100s and stuff, and you want an extremely comfortable, cozy build that is very, very easy to play. You have extremely high uptime on Blood Mist, which is literally an immunity. You have a ton of damage reduction, and I have like 25,000 life, missing a ton of life rolls and rubies and stuff on my gear. This is the build for you. This build is going to be utilizing the mages mostly, and the golem is kind of just there for a little bit of assistance. There's a way to set up the build where you're using both golem and mages, but I think the easiest thing to do, both from a gearing perspective and for the majority of people, is to just go into the mages first off, and then you can kind of start leaning towards the golem later on once you get perfect gear and stuff. But as you can see, the mages do an absolutely ridiculous amount of damage by themselves, and if you go into like a pure bossing setup with the mages, you can actually have them hit for, like, as you can see, 15 to 16 million per hit, and they're just Gatling gunning out these hits. Like, their attack speed is through the roof, so they do pretty good damage. Not as much boss damage as a golem, but like I said, I will make a boss damage golem build. As always, my build will be over on Mobalytics, and the build link will be in the description, and I will have a ton of different variants there for you guys. Firstly, the Shadow Mages one, but as I update it, I will have a bossing one and a hybrid one with both golem, etc. So feel free to check that out. Today's sponsor is Mobalytics. I'd highly recommend that you guys download the desktop app. Not only is it great for being able to easily reference my builds, you can even like look at my profile and just see when I upload new builds, but there's a ton of really helpful stuff on here. For example, you can check out the community builds. Mine is number one. Make sure to give it a favorite. But there's a ton of different other builds on here that you guys can check out from people that aren't even creators, right? There's a ton of people that just post their own builds. Even you can post your own builds. So if you're trying to look for something new, for example, like a very particular druid build, you can see all sorts of different stuff here. They also have a tier list, which is really helpful. So you can pop open here and even check that, oh, maybe I want to do like Bone Spear, Minion Necromancer, or check out how Tornado is, etc. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can check out here. You can also mess around with the build planner, so you can see what legendaries and stuff you want to look out for on gear, and even like post your own builds, like I said. It really is just the best tool if you're trying to find new and interesting builds. I use it personally a lot to look at how other people are setting stuff up and draw inspiration from them, so I would highly recommend checking it out. Something that is very particularly nice about it is if you download the desktop app, you can use the in-game overlay. You just press Tab Q, and then you can even open up My Build. And then this is very, very nice for like implementing Paragon board, for example. So I could open up the Paragon board right here, side by side, and look at how seamless this is. I can just look at it down here, and boom. Could I full screen? I guess you guys can't really see it because my camera's in the way, so my bad. But look at this. You can have it right here, and you can just very easily copy paste. Like, if that isn't enough of a reason to download it, I don't know what else is, but you can just see the entirety of the build, etc. So highly recommend downloading the Mobalytics desktop app. But anyways, let's get into the build. So like I said, I am leaning full into the skeletal mages for the shadow mages, actually. This is because early on they just do a ton of damage, and I find unless you have really high damage with the golem, the mages doing damage is just going to make it to where you have way faster clear speed. The AI with them can be a little bit janky. Sometimes you walk up to a boss and it gets instantly deleted. Other times the mages are like, ooh, I'm not really hitting the boss. So, you know, that's kind of just what's going to happen with the minion AI, but the mages is probably your best bet if you want to quickly clear stuff and you want it to just work at a baseline. Like I said, I will make a golem version of the build. With this build, golem isn't really doing pretty much any of our damage because I'm not speccing into it. I'm going full into the mages, but a golem version is viable, but like I said, I think mages is going to be your best bet overall. The general crux of the build is that we are using shadow mages, and we can spawn a lot of them with the additional chance to fire extra shadow bolts. The reason that we want it to be shadow is because we gain a lot of additional damage when they deal shadow, and we get the blighted aspect on a two-hander, which is a 240% damage multiplier, which is unbelievably insane. And then you compare this with some other stuff, like you deal 50% increased shadow damage to enemies affected by a curse. And you proc the Shadow Blight key passive quite a lot just because our mages are doing shadow damage, but also we use Blight, so we deal 20% increased damage to enemies affected by this, so this will help us proc it. And a lot of you guys were curious why I'm spec'd into Corpse Explosion, but I don't have it on my bar. Because I'm using Blood Mist with the trigger Corpse Explosion, And then I have Corpse Explosion being a blighted skill or darkness skill. This is going to help us proc our Shadow Blight even more. And because we are proccing all those corpses, it really helps out with keeping up the Flesh Eater passive for a 40% multiplicative damage increase. My main goal with this build was to give you a ton of survivability, which I think is Necromancer's biggest problem, while also having it be extremely relaxed to play and doing very high damage, so you can just walk through T100s and kind of just chill. Like, my goal for this build, my vision, is you can just sit back on the couch and kind of just walk around and be like, you know, drunk and play the build perfectly fine, and you don't have to worry about anything. So because of that, these are the skills that I'm using. Blight is just for an increase in damage and keeping up the Shadow Blight passive. Corpse Tendrils is very nice, kind of for like survivability. It sucks all the enemies in, and it is your only source of vulnerable for the build, mainly for when you're fighting bosses. Blood Mist, which most people don't seem to be using, is insanely good because it's an immunity, right? And you can actually be in Blood Mist pretty much all the time if you're using the Reaper's activate cooldown reduction. The Reapers are going to have very, very high attack speed, so it's going to be constantly resetting the cooldown of your Blood Mist. If you look at the gameplay, and I'll do some gameplay at the end, I'm just in Blood Mist like 70% of the time or so, and you can get way more cooldown reduction on your gear and stuff. There's probably a way to set it up to where you're permanently in Blood Mist. And then I have Decrepify, so that enemies deal less damage to me, and they are permanently slowed, and you get some cooldown reduction with Decrepify. But you want to have a curse, because if you curse enemies, that kind of directs your minions to go fight those guys, and you deal extra damage to enemies affected by a curse, so that is a no-brainer. And like I said, I have Corpse Explosion, but it is not on the bar because I'm proccing it with Blood Mist via the Explosive Mist aspect. The way that I have the build set up, I sacrificed a little bit of damage for way more survivability and making the build a lot easier to play. One of those sacrifices is using the Ring of the Sacrilegious Soul. You lose a lot of damage, pretty much losing a damage aspect and losing the stats on a ring in order to use this. But I found the damage with the build is really high anyways, unless you're trying to push like Pit tier 100 or whatever. Most of you guys don't care about that, right? You just want a very comfy, cozy build to play with. The button bloat is pretty severe unless you use this. Using this will automatically raise skeletons, so anytime the minions die, it'll raise the skeletons. But you also want to proc this every 6 or 7 seconds so that you get the Skeletal Priest Empower, which increases their damage by 30%, and it is going to heal them. If you have the ring on, you pretty much never have to worry about pressing this button. It's also going to automatically Corpse Tendril for you, so you don't have to worry about pressing that button either. So the only thing that you manually have to do is pretty much just Decrepify and kind of just sit in Blood Mist. I don't even use the active Golem ability because I'm only using the Golem for the survivability for the 30% damage reduction. So you can see that I've made some trade-offs for some survivability just because I think the damage inherently is so high, and I want the build to be really comfy and cozy for you guys. Alternatively, though, you could swap to a pure damage ring without having to use the Ring of the Sacrilegious. This is probably the biggest trade-off that I made, but it makes playing the build like 1,000 times easier, and you don't have to worry about, like, you know, maintaining all of these things. One thing I want to mention, and I'll get into the skill tree here, is that I'm not using Army of the Dead. The cooldown is way too long, and if you build into the cooldown, then your Reapers aren't going to give you cooldown reduction on Blood Mist, and you probably have to swap Blood Mist out. And again, I wanted the build to be very, very tanky for you guys. Raise Army of the Dead, really, really long cooldown. It is insane for bosses, though, if you use the Legendary. So if you're fighting bosses, you do want to use the Legendary with Army of the Dead, but for general map clearing and stuff, it's kind of a waste to have it on your bar, in my opinion, because you really don't need the damage unless you're doing very high pit. When it comes to your skill points, slam anything up here because you just have to. Go into Blight, and then you want Hewed Flesh for a chance to spawn corpses against bosses, which is going to be, or just against normal mobs, which is really nice because you need corpses for all of your corpse stuff. Blood Mist with the corpse spawning, so that anytime you're in your Blood Mist, you guarantee proc corpse explosions. Again, this is very good for keeping up Shadow Blight uptime, reducing the cooldown on your Blood Mist, and also permanently having Flesh Eater for 40% increased damage. Fueled by Death for 9% increased damage all the time. Death's Embrace for damage. Death's Approach for movement speed. You can actually swap out of this if you want. Full into Amplified damage. And then Decrepify cooldown reduction. Skeletal Mage Mastery, of course, for a lot of extra damage. I don't go into Skeletal Warrior Mastery because they aren't really doing any damage for us. We're just having the Reapers there just for the cooldown reduction. And with the Skeletal Priest constantly proccing, you know, they'll die sometimes, but it's fine because they're getting healed and respawned. Corpse Tendrils for the vulnerable, and Corpse Tendrils is very good for survivability, for pulling in all the enemies, and you can kind of just blood mist in a circle around them. It really helps your minions out, kill them. Necrotic Carapace will pretty much give us Fortify as a result of using Hued Flesh and just killing enemies, so that's a nice damage reduction. Reaper's Pursuit for movement speed, again, you could swap out of this if you just wanted to go into Warriors, or you want to get Armor Capped without using an Armor Legendary, you could get into that. Gloom is just 16% or 18% increased damage, so that is nice. Terror is also increased damage against slowed enemies, which you are doing with Decrepify. Max out Golem Mastery. Our Golem doesn't really do much damage, but we don't have anything else to put the point into. If your minions are dying a lot, you could go into Death's Defense or Bonded in Essence instead of Golem Mastery. The Golem is kind of just there for the damage reduction, and it helps hit enemies every once in a while. It's mainly there for survivability, though, so you could even take the Golem out entirely if you really wanted to play with Army of the Dead. Inspiring Leader and Hellbent Commander are absolutely insane. This gives you 30% crit chance by itself. Very, very good. And then, of course, the Shadow Blight key passive. Touch on some of the legendaries, but I want to go over which ones are the absolute best. So Blighted you want on the two-hander because it is a 240% damage multiplier, which is unbelievably insane, and you will have pretty good uptime on this once you have very high attack speed with your minions. And if you make sure to use your Blight and you proc a lot of Corpse Explosions with your Blood Mist, you'll have decent uptime on this. Hard to have 100% uptime, but it is what it is. On your Amulet, you want to have Frenzy Dead. This gives you 68% increased attack speed for your minions. Very, very good because attack speed is just straight up damage, but also attack speed is going to go into Cult Leader, giving you a huge damage increase. So this is extremely powerful. Highly recommend going into that. For our last legendaries, for damage, we want Reanimation on one of our rings, and then we want the Damned, I think it's called, for 50% increased shadow damage to enemies affected by any curse. If you don't want to use Ring of Sacrilegious and you just want more raw damage, you'd go for Grasping Veins. Grasping Veins, the crit damage doesn't work for your minions, but the crit chance does, and you do have a decent amount of crit damage multipliers, so it is a okay damage increase, around the effect of 15% or so, getting that crit chance. But if you want the build to be cozy, Sacrilegious Soul is definitely your best bet. Of course, you want to have increasing amount of mages that you can get by 2, because that is the majority of our damage. You want to have Juggernaut on early into the build. You can actually set this up to where you don't need Juggernaut. You lose a little bit of max HP, but there isn't really another legendary you can gain here other than a damage one, which is the Skeletal Priest Empower You by 70%. That will increase your minion damage by 20% if you use that. So if you're able to get Armor Cap, which is 9,300, without Juggernaut, then you'd want to put that on for a 20% damage increase. So make sure to keep that in mind. And then on the pants, I think this is mandatory, just 25% increased damage reduction for you and your minions. And Explosive Mist, of course, for Blood Mist. As you can see, I have a ton of maximum life. Necromancer has a hard time getting a lot of damage reduction, so the best way to get survivability is just juice up your max HP. I'm missing a ton of rubies right now, like 3 or 4, right? Your max HP could easily be 30,000 if you had much better gear than I do. But let's get into the gear that you want. This gear, like I said, is very scuffed, and the build will be like infinitely better when you have actually good gear and you can start masterworking your gear and stuff. On the helmet, I would recommend Int, max HP, and cooldown reduction. Intelligence will increase the damage of your minions, so that is very nice. And Curse Duration on at least one piece I found to be helpful so that our Decrepify lasts for a really long time. You only have to put it down like one time on a boss, so you don't have to spam the button, which is nice. But alternatively, you could get Corpse Tendril Radius, or you can get Decrepify Size. And then you want max HP or armor again if you're trying to get Armor Cap without Juggernaut. On the chest, you want Intelligence, max HP, and then you could either get armor or you can get ranks of Golem Mastery. Again, Golem is not our damage right now, so we don't really care about getting Golem Mastery. This is just a chest that I happen to get, and max HP and Decrepify Size is very nice. On the gloves, these are impossible to get for whatever reason. You want attack speed, crit chance, and Skeletal Mage Mastery. That is the best, and you want Skeletal Mage damage and either Corpse Tundra Size or Decrepify Size. On the pants, Int, max HP, and instead of armor, you could have it just be like a max HP roll, and you want Skeletal Mage Mastery. And of course, on the gloves and the pants, these are the only places you can get Skeletal Mage Mastery anymore. Ideally, you want those to be greater affixed, and then you want to masterwork them so they can be like +4 ranks. On the boots, you want Int, max HP, and then the last roll really doesn't matter. You can get like movement speed, but you're kind of behind the minions all the time, so movement speed isn't even that good. But it's nice for just when you have to like run a little bit further. Life per second is okay. Feel free to just get whatever you want on the boots. It's not a big deal. On the weapon, you want Intelligence, and then you can either get vulnerable damage or crit damage. And max HP I found to be really nice. if you see I take this off, I go from 24,000 to 20,000. So the max HP on the weapon is just a massive value. You have a ton of additive damage already, like 1400 with mages and all this other stuff. So getting that additional like little bit of additive from instead of the maximum life, I don't think is worth it. So I recommend that. And then you want to go for skeletal mages damage and chance for the skeletal mages to attack twice. You want the chance for them to attack twice to be the highest roll possible, ideally, and you want that to be your masterwork, greater affix if you can. On the rings, you want exactly this roll: int, attack speed, crit chance. Prioritize the attack speed and the crit chance, and you want skeletal mage damage. For the other thing, I would just get golem cooldown reduction in case you plan on using golems later on, but resource, like there's nothing else good to put on the resource. I guess you could do Army of the Dead cooldown reduction if you plan on playing with Army of the Dead, but I already talked about that. Ring the Sacrilegious Soul, if you don't use this, you would just use a ring identical to this, and again, Grasping Veins. On the amulet, there's some really good stuff you can get here. You want attack speed and crit chance, and then you can actually get, I think it's possible to get amplified damage and ranks to Hellbent Commander, but Hellbent Commander is your best bet. 45% increased damage if you can get that. You can actually get plus 4 or 5 ranks if you fully masterwork it, and it's greater affix. So that's your best bet. Getting the attack speed anywhere you can is very important because attack speed is just more raw damage, and it converts into more damage with Cult Leader. And crit chance is very hard to come by as well. So that is ultimately what I would recommend. Attack speed, crit chance, and Hellbent Commander is going to be the best overall. Just to reiterate, for the Reapers, you want the cooldown reduction. For the Skeletal Mages, you want the chance to fire extra, or not chance, but every 3 attacks it fires an extra bolt. And for the Golem, I am going for the damage reduction because that is pretty much the only reason I'm using this guy. When it comes to elixirs, if you're fighting bosses, you want to go for the attack speed elixir. It's 15%, and keep in mind this does convert into more damage with the Cult Leader, so that is a lot of damage. For general dungeons, I found Holy Bolts to be insane. You kill one little tiny mob, and then it kind of just ricochets and kills everything. This will help your clear speed very, very much. When it comes to the Paragon board, this is a little bit scuffed right now. I will have it in the description, of course, but you can get your max resistance pretty easily, and if you're missing some resistance, I'm like missing a diamond here, and I'm still perfectly capped because I got a lot in the Paragon board, but if you're missing some, there's a couple points here that I left out that you can grab easily. The biggest thing early on is to grab Cult Leader as fast as humanly possible because this is a huge multiplier. My board is kind of scuffed, so don't look at it too much because it looks pretty ugly. It's kind of point inefficient, but I'll fix it. Dead Razor is really nice for just increased damage for our minions. And then Flesh Eater, 40% damage all the time. Amplify, buffs this resistance element, and you get 10% increased multiplicative damage. Scent of Death is okay. It's kind of just for damage reduction, to be honest. And then I made sure to get a lot of max HP where possible, because that's kind of the only damage reduction you can get on Necromancer. If you still feel like you're dying a lot, you could actually add on the Territorial Glyph for 10% damage reduction against close enemies, but I didn't find that it's necessary. But you could swap out Essence if you wanted to. Essence is okay. The problem is our crit chance is really, really low. So even though it's a 22% multiplier, it's not that good because our crit chance is really low, unfortunately, and there's not much we can do about that. Scourge is also just another multiplier, and I'm using Darkness for some damage reduction and shadow damage. That is pretty much it for the build. Again, Paragon board will be in the description, and if you want more damage, you could spec like out of a lot of this max HP that I have and probably gain a full extra glyph if you wanted to, but I'll have a damage version of the build in the planner. It might not be up like immediately, but I will be working on that. I'll do a pit run real quick for you guys. My minions aren't out for whatever reason, so let's get them spawned. The version, like I said, the version that I have the build set up with is kind of not really based around doing as much damage as humanly possible. It is mainly for survivability and very easily setting stuff up. So this build isn't going to be able to do like, you know, pit 100, but you can, I mean, you probably could do it if you wanted to, if you had it set up a little bit better. Like my gear is pretty bad, but the damage is lower than like the potential of what it could be, right? The main reason for this, or the way that I have it set up, is kind of just so you can stroll in here and play without any problem at all. As you can see, I have pretty good uptime on my Blood Mist here, and the minions kind of just kill everything. Holy Bolt is insanely good. As you can see, it looks like I have an artillery shrine all the time, but I don't. It's just a Holy Bolt. And you don't really have to do much of anything. As long as you make sure to just curse stuff, and you kind of wait around for your minions, they will pretty much just kill everything. And that's why I like having the ring, because I permanently have the buff up just from the ring. I don't ever have to manually do it myself, and it's just corpse tendriling for me, and I don't really have to worry about it. You could manually corpse tendril if you ever feel like you are in a sticky situation and you need everything to get corpse tendrilled, But just not doing it yourself manually means you get more cooldown reduction on your Blood Mist, which is just nice for survivability. The clear speed is not going to ever be as fast as like a sorcerer or something, because you still need to wait for your minions, and look, like if they get all frozen like that, there's not really anything you can do. But I mean, you guys can tell they kind of just, mow everything down. And if you had way better gear than I did with more Skeletal Mage Mastery, and it's a little bit more min-maxed, you would pretty much just be one-shotting everything, right? So I did sacrifice a bit of damage to use the Ring of the Sacrilegious, like I mentioned, but it makes the build like super, super cozy. And this is around the tier that you probably want to farm to get like Master Working Mats. It's at a point where stuff dies really, really fast still, and you aren't really at much risk of dying at all. But hopefully you guys enjoy the kind of having Blood Mist and having all the survivability. I find it to be really helpful, so you don't ever have to worry about anything. And I don't know, I'm just a big fan of it. I've played without having Blood Mist and having to like manually cast everything, and it's just a lot of button bloat. It's kind of just annoying to play with, to be honest with you. And like, I just imagine some dude that's like drunk off his ass after work gets home from a 12-hour construction shift and wants to drink a beer and play some Minion Necro. I imagine that guy is not going to have fun pressing 50 buttons on his Minion Necro. He'd rather just like, stroll through here, Decrepify, Blight, Blood Mist. Oh, I'm stuck behind the wall. Minions help. Minions help. I might actually die, dude. Alright, I'm fine. You know what I mean? Just a lot more chill. Those walls are kind of like turbo int because you can't Blood Mist through them. And the minions are quite slow. I do want to mess around with the Golem though, and that's what I'm going to do like immediately after this, is I'm going to set up a Golem bossing build, because I want to be killing the level 200 bosses, so be on the lookout for that. Let's kill this boss. When it comes to bosses, there's not really much you have to do. You just blight, and then manually try to spawn a corpse tendril if you can. If you get a corpse, it's just dependent on RNG though. And anytime that there's a mechanic, you can pretty much just Blood Mist. As you can see though, I didn't get the corpse tendril, so I don't have vulnerable. The damage on bosses is pretty random. Sometimes you will instantaneously kill the boss. Other times the minions are getting knocked around by stuff and they're kind of whiffing, whatever. But you can see bosses die pretty quickly. That's the gameplay demonstration. If you're like just leveling up to level 100, you won't take damage ever with the amount of HP that you have and the Golem. And everything will pretty much just get one shot as long as you just have the legendaries, which is pretty much where the majority of the power lies for the build. Anyways, I will be updating this, and oh, I got some pretty good legendaries there. I will be updating this and trying to iterate on it and making it a lot better. If you guys have any suggestions, leave it down in the comments. I just wanted to make a early on version for you guys to see, just to give you something to set yourself up with and start out in the end game, and even just get to level 100. That is going to be really strong. But later on, I'm going to be changing a lot of stuff, and like I said, I'm going to try a Golem build. So we'll see how that goes. Subscribe if you want to see it. Thanks for watching. Hope you found it helpful, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.